Well, I think you know where you are because it is Monday and it is 7 o'clock. And if you were ever interested in Nephilim, which is all I ever hear about now, the ancient giants of the Bible, well, there's a man who wrote the Nephilim Chronicles, an entire series about old school what did they call antediluvian Noah, Nephilim, crazy stuff. And he wrote it, and it's a big, giant, popular series. His name's Brian Godawa, and we got him here today. If you're an author and you like writing, you're going to love this interview. I would love to talk more, but I can't until I hear my little music to make me feel good about myself. Ladies and gentlemen, my song. Hey, it's 7 o'clock and I'm Brad Stine, God's comic, and this is Brad Stine Has Issues, where comedy, conservatism, and Christianity collide in a cacophony of clarity. We are here. We are excited. We have an amazing guest on tonight, Brian Godawa, who's a screenwriter. He actually wrote a screenplay that had Kiefer Sutherland in it. We're going to be talking about that. And the Nephilim Chronicles. So you are going to love this guy. Wyatt, you wanted to be a writer and you failed miserably. Do you remember why?
Well, it's not that I failed. It's just that all of my writing ideas are in my head, which apparently is really bad for distribution.
You know what? That's probably true. The only way you would make any money is if you catered to psychics.
I mean, early storytelling was all oral, you know. I mean, maybe I can just peruse the streets asking random strangers, hey, you want to hear a story I wrote?
Yeah. Say oral again.
Oral.
Yeah. Now, folks, that's
Is that correct?
No, it is oral. It's just for your entire life, people have asked you, are you from England? Now, the reason they think that is because he has always had difficulty saying the R word. He had, what did you have? You had speech delay. You had gross motor skills delay. You were a train wreck.
Oh yeah, I was a mess.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So he's very focused on trying to get his R's out, but it's still difficult for him. And so I love him. He's my son. And the most important thing, of course, is what, Wyatt? You came.
Oh. The loin joke,
yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen.
You came from
we
my
can't have a Brad Stine Has Issues podcast episode without a loins joke.
Well, we could, but it wouldn't be any fun, right?
You know what? Sure. Why not? Let's not test that theory. Let's just go ahead and assume that the podcast would just fall and crumble to dust if we didn't pick the lowest hanging fruit in our garden.
I see. And when you talk about low hanging fruit, are you discussing my loins? Mm-hmm. You know what? You got to be very careful about the terminology used in referencing.
You know what?
Yeah.
I'll give you that.
Yeah.
But I'm watching you.
Yeah. Okay. Hilarious. Duke White Jr., by the way, is a new friend of mine, and we are going to be very soon in Virginia shooting Laugh While It's Legal. For those who've heard me and talk about it, we're going to shoot it, and it's going to be available on Good View Television. So I thought I'd just launch that right here in my podcast. And if you guys want to know more information about that, if you're in the Virginia area, you want to buy tickets, you want to send a bunch of shout-outs to friends in Virginia who want to be there live and watch it. It's also a fundraiser for the venue, but it also is going to be something for them to shoot and use on their platform, a Christian platform, and it's going to be something I have available to sell as my next album if it pans out the way we'd hope. So just letting you guys know, and we'll get you some clips and some links so you can share it, and we can try to really blow the place up. Hang on one second, producer, excuse me, Wyatt. Can you move out while you're talking, and then come back in?
I'm sorry.
Could you walk in?
I didn't mean to interrupt you in the middle of the podcast.
Well.
Talking to a guest. How inconsiderate of me.
It's a good thing no one else did that exact same thing. Otherwise, this would be pretty awkward.
I'm just saying, if you get her set up, can you do? Folks, I am so sorry. If you're a first-timer to Brad Stine Has Issues. This is why you're a first-timer and why it doesn't last. To say thank you for your prayers. I want to say thank you for your loyalty. You've been so kind. If you want to join the militia of the mind, you just go to bradstein.com. It's going to be your email and information so that you can be part of us. We're all a family. We're trying to grow this as people who, if whatever happens on this earth or in this country, we can try to stay in touch and just be there for each other if it's possible. If you want to join the Mighty 10,000, it's $3 a month, unless you want to join the upgraded version. But it allows you to get some special answers to questions. And you can also look at my concert videos online with that. And then if you go to the next level, you can actually get them downloaded and keep them. And if you go to the highest level, you get your free t-shirt with your Mighty 10,000 number personally subscribe for me onto it for you, and you can wear it around. You can buy your Militia of the Mind as well if you don't want to go to the high level, and I'll sign your number there. And so I'm trying to grow the ministry. I really just want 10,000 people that said we want to be all in for Christ. We want to be all in as our faith. We want to be here for each other. So as each one of us struggle or are going through difficulties or great things together, we can share in that. I'm at a point in my life, guys, where I was struggling with, how this podcast should pan out. I know how to do the guests, and I want to use, as you know, eclectic guests. So they're not always Christians. Could be an atheist. Could be a sword swallower. Could be, a pastor. I would always wrestle with, do I do of a conservative and Christian to broaden the net as to who could come watch and who might enjoy it? Because it's for Christians and conservatives. So I'm probably not going to get a lot of atheists, though I have over the past. There was a guy that used to show up all the time. I'm not going to get maybe a lot of, certainly not going to get a lot of left-leaners, more than likely, unless they're just curious. But I was trying to find, the largest swath of potential people that might enjoy what I'm doing. This is a Christian podcast. This is about God Almighty, Jesus Christ. He's God. Folks, the world, it's dying. Everything that made any sense, any kind of respect for freedom and differences of opinions and free markets, people having their own place and having their own little lives. And now most of us aren't going to be multi-billionaires. And those who made it, bravo. Good for you. That doesn't give you the right to rule the rest of us. And as you know on this podcast, that has bothered me. I'm just at a spot where I just feel like my purpose, and I know God told me this a long time ago, is to the church. My mission's to the church. Just to basically use my motto, if you say you're a Christian, then act like it. It's time to get all in. This is why we're here. It's so short. And it's okay. Don't you want to go home? Because this isn't my home. Where you at, it's not your home. United States, not my home. Earth, not my home. And when the pain comes, God never wastes it. You can. God doesn't. When the pains come, guys, it's to learn from it. Lord, teach me through some of this struggle I'm going through. It draws me close to him because I got nowhere else to go. And I remember thinking to myself, it's funny, if I wasn't going through some of this, I'd be sitting down during the day, going through some emails, going through some Facebooks, going doing some chores around the house, doing whatever, just kind of killing time till the podcast. Then tomorrow I'd do whatever and kill time till this thing happens and that. And the next day and the next, and kind of just waiting until I go to a show and really living life, but kind of letting it be frivolous. And then suddenly you go through a challenge and you get close to God and you said, God, this is better. I'm struggling and I'm in pain, but this is better. This is better because it made me get close to you. It made me call out to you. It made me look to your word and your ideas and your thoughts and your beliefs and your revelation as all that I have. It's true. I'm living it like it's true. Trying to see Jesus as a human, like a human, an entity that I can have a personal relationship with. The Bible says, love God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, your strength. Well, I've always loved him with my mind. That I've had down. I'm my whole thing about my mind. I'm an autodidact. An intellectual. I just think about stuff, and my brain can't shut down, and that's great. It makes for a lot of great creativity and a lot of great. It accomplishes a lot of great things. Is oftentimes impersonal. It's more analytical, right? It's right brainy, kind of just dissecting things. Now you got to be left brain if you're going creative, but it's very sort of hard drive stuck stuff, and your mind, soul, your faith has been given to God. Your trust of your eternal forever is with the living God in eternity. We're all going to die and go to eternity in heaven because I accepted Christ. He paid the price for my sin. That's what it's for. So. Mind, body, soul, and strength. So, that part I feel like I've always kind of done. But the heart, love God with all your heart, it's like I feel like that personal connection to him, that one I've struggled with to feel really tight because I've known people. There's a guy I would love to get on the podcast. I don't know if it's possible. His name is Arthur Blessett, and he's a guy that carried a cross with a wheel around the world. He actually has the world's record for the longest walk by any human being in history. He's in the Guinness Book of World Record. A missionary, Arthur Blessett, carried the cross around the world. And I knew him and we're friends. And he's one of the few people really I've ever met that I thought to myself, this must be what a disciple would have been like. And also, it's like he knew Jesus like he was his best friend. Like there was something different about this guy's countenance in respect to Christ. It's like, I want that. I want that. And I didn't know how to get there. And so I find that my life, whenever I've had huge breakthroughs of problems in my character that I needed to get healed and fixed, it had to come through a lot of pain, a very dark night of the soul. It's like it's the only way God can sort of filter in there and chip away the edges and help me see how to move into the next phase. So that's kind of where I'm at now. I could use your prayers. I would love your prayers. I really would. If you would just pray for me that God would give me peace and strength and trust that I will see victory, complete victory. I pray for that. And as I said, soon I'll talk to you guys about it. That being said, I want to introduce you to this next guest. This man, you might have heard of him. You look him up, and now I guarantee you that there will be a Brian Godawa website or something that Karen will pop up there because she's the queen of that after she took it over from Benjamin Gregory. And so you'll get to see who he is. But he's quite a proficient writer. I think it's bestsellers, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not sure if it's a New York Times bestseller or if it's within the Christian publishing field, but it is a bestseller, and he's written, I don't know how many, 10, 20 of them. It's a whole series, right? It's like the Tolkien stuff, or it's kind of like the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? Stuff. So this is it. Maybe some of you have had the book, read the book. The particular one that I was talking about was Nephilim Chronicles, dealing with the Nephilim from Noah's time and the giants. And we're hearing a lot about that with Michael Heiser, the late Michael Heiser, who really talked about the Nephilim and who they were and what this is all about. There's so much to the Bible and to our faith that is deeper and richer. There's so much more in the spiritual realm, and that was what Michael wrote, the unseen realm, that is just deeper and richer and more beautiful than anything that we have ever usually been taught in our church in America anyways. And so this is part of this giant world of seen and unseen that has been participating with each other for eons. And so it's amazing books. But for those of you who are interested in writing, those who are curious about something, he wrote a screenplay that was on a feature film. So you might find this fascinating, but he's a brother. He's one of us. And so that being said, I want to say thank you for coming out. We'll be back here next Monday. But for right now, guys, enjoy this interview with Brian Godawa. Well, guys, as I said to you on Stine Has Issues, We always try to be eclectic. If you don't know what eclectic means, I'm going to send you a dictionary, and it's going to be part of my merch. So you're going to have to buy it, and that way I can make tons of money selling dictionaries to people that don't know what eclectic means or other words. But I always felt like one of the things that you don't often see in Christian podcasts, certainly, is kind of a wide variety of people that don't seem to fit. That's why I've had a sword swallower. That's why I've had a sideshow performer. That's why I've had an atheist. But there are other times when the person fits like a glove. In this particular case, I think that is true, kind of, but also the person is a little unorthodox in the best sense of the word. I feel like great Christianity comes in lots of flavors and lots of dimensions and lots of means by which God communicates. He doesn't make it simple. He doesn't make it cookie cutter. He makes sure that we come in lots of different angles and flavors because he has to reach a lot of people. So he needs lots of ways to do that. And so he has to mix it up. And so today I'm bringing somebody on from a little bit different perspective. And I'm going to tell you why in just a minute. But first I want to introduce him. He is an author, but much more, which you're about to find out. So please welcome to Brad Stine Has Issues, Brian Godawa. Hello, Brian. Yes, that's what I love. He provides his own audience.
An audience of one.
That's right. Welcome to my career. Well, listen, Brian, I appreciate you coming on. It was kind of last minute, and you were gracious enough to jump on with me. But I'm going to kind of preface this a little differently than typically, and then let you run with it, and you'll see why in a minute. So for those of you who are watching or are used to seeing a lot of my guests, usually it's the same thing. A guy gets on, he says, listen, I have so-and-so on. They got this great book that I read. I wanted to introduce you to. Or, hey, they've got this incredible life ministry, or they have this skill set that's so interesting, or they have a perspective or an ideology or philosophy or point of view that I want to talk about, and I want to get everybody's point of view on my podcast, because even though I'm a Christian conservative, I just find it more interesting to get people that have different points of view or have similar points of view of mine, but kind of a different angle, and keep it fresh. And you're kind of, I think, in that regard. And here's what I mean. I don't know if you remember how you and I first got to know each other. I don't know if you'll remember. You may not. So I'm going to throw it out there and you can tell me. We met accidentally because you were either dabbling in or were professionally a graphic artist. And I think it might have been through Adam Christing, but I created an album, my first comedy album, and I needed, this is 90s maybe, so computer wasn't as sophisticated, apps weren't out there, didn't have I mean, there wasn't all the go-to technology that we can do now at a sophisticated level for pennies. You kind of had to be pretty good at it and really know what you're doing. And I created my first tour, my first comedy set called Rebel Without a Curse. Now, it has been redistributed on YouTube a couple months ago because I discovered it. It was lost, and somebody actually had it and digitized it, a fan out there. And he sent it to me, and so I said, well, heck, this is mine. I haven't seen it in years. It was recorded in 1999. Anyways, I think prior to that, I had done the similar material on CD only, and I needed an album cover. And I think it was Adam Christing of Clean Comedians said, I know a guy that, can help doctor up a graphic. And so we kind of started an email correspondence, and you gave me different things. I said, what about this? I think you were starting to get annoyed, like, look, I've given you 55 different versions. Just choose one. Let's roll. But anyway,
I hate that about clients.
I know. It's like, how many angles do you want? But anyways, that's how we first met. Do you recall that?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah. Clean Comedians. Adam was doing Clean Comedians. I don't know if you were a part of that, but at the time, but definitely, yeah, you were working with him on that. And so, yeah, I was a graphic designer, and I've been an artist all my life. I've just done different kinds of art. And while I still use my graphic design skills in all my marketing and all my book cover, I do all my own artwork and stuff. I've turned more towards my writing as being my dominant career now. So,
Well, so here's the two things that are a little different in the intro, other than just that sort of trip down memory lane to see if you even recall
and
that.
one thing, you were funny.
Oh,
You were fun. No, I'm just kidding.
yeah, and then something went terribly wrong.
No, you were one of the ones that, like, because at the time, 1990s, Clean Comedians was a unique idea, but not everyone was funny. Let's put it that way. But I really did enjoy your work. So.
Well, I appreciate it, but I came out of comedy clubs, so I kind of had to learn how to be funny, or I wasn't going to survive. I wasn't a church comic, so I was forced to be good at my craft, which is kind of a sad testimony to what has passed for Christian art, often in the newer generation. Certainly not historically. We were the greatest artists, or at least Christian driven art was the greatest in history. But I mean, Pieta, Sistine Chapel. I mean, please. But anyways, but I kind of have watched your career a little bit accidentally, not like I was stalking you. There was that one time when I peered through, but I never let you know about that. I still have the pictures, but it's not like I saw. But your name would kind of pop up. I would just see it, and I would remember thinking, "Hey, isn't that the guy that did my?" Because your life moves on, and it wasn't like we were friends. We just had a little business moment, and that was that. But I saw that you kind of were showing up in the film industry, which is something that I was suddenly started doing, getting into faith-based films. I think we both were friends with John Sullivan, who was involved in some films, and then him and I were doing some things together. And but I was kind of fascinated because it seemed as though you were moving off into a little bit more diversified direction than what I thought. I just thought was some graphic artist somewhere in Cerritos slapped me something out for my CD. And I started seeing you doing this things and that thing, and I started kind of going, this guy seems to be pretty clever, pretty robust in his skill set, and yet didn't really know where you settled. So I thought, I'm going to try something a little different. Why don't you tell the audience kind of your journey, because I think they'll find it interesting, and the things you've dabbled in, and kind of where you ended up, because I stumbled upon these books of yours, and usually I read something and I'm interested and I want to get some more insight from that. I don't have any idea what your books are. I don't. I just saw them and I said, this is not just one, he's got a series, and they just sound really interesting. And I know this guy from years ago, and he seems to be quite an artist, and I just want to talk to him. I want to see what he's up to and how he ended up here, because I think there's something a lot of people can learn, believer or non-believer, in your journey. So I'm going to give you the floor, and I want you to explain to people anywhere from how you came to faith to where you ended up, but more importantly, just your artistic acumen and how you've brought it to culture, especially in a culture that's so anti-Christian now.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks, Brad, and thanks for your candor too, because I appreciate that your honesty about where you're at and how much you know about my work, and that's totally fair, because life is very busy, especially like you and I, we're artists, and so we're always trying to create, and so many things vie to take your attention away, and you just want to get back to creating, and I know that's how my life is as well. So I don't get to read all the things I want to read and look into as well. So thanks for that. I'll make as brief as possible, but Yeah, my journey as a Christian, I would say I'm a Christian who's an artist. And, I became a Christian when I was in high school. So I was already an artist, always been an artist. In fact, you mentioned Michelangelo's works. Michelangelo was my personal hero as an artist from a very young age. His work was so fantastic to me and great, even though I wasn't a Christian at the time. But in fact, he represented the thing that I aspired to. When I was young, as an artist, I've always been obsessed with death, not in a suicidal way, but more in the sense of it's the inevitability for us all. It's the great crusher, the great equalizer. It's the kind of thing that you think about when you're looking for meaning and purpose in life, which is what I've always been driven by, the pursuit of significance, the pursuit of meaning and purpose. And I had actually, as a young artist, I thought Michelangelo was the exemplar because, of course, when I died, people would still be studying my work. But when a fellow artist actually did commit suicide, he suffered with depression. I didn't know anything about that at the time, but it really got me thinking a lot about death, more specifically rather than abstractly, And it really forced me to realize that the meaning and purpose that I sought for really could not be found in this life, because my little blip of an existence on the timeline of eternity is so insignificant that it doesn't even matter if I was a Michelangelo, because when I was dead, wherever I would be, I would have no connection to what's going on anyway. And so I would be dead a heck of a lot longer than I was alive. So it made me start to really consider, well, what about this afterlife? What about this, God that I hear about, but seems distant, surely, And I'd become a Christian through just a, kind of an evangelical church. But at the time, we're talking the 80s, at the time, the Christian or the arts were not very big in the church. This was like Randy Stonehill and Larry Norman. They were well known by certain Christians, but it wasn't in churches. But this church actually played rock music in their youth group. They did skits. And again, this is not new now, but it was at the time. And I think that touched my creative soul and opened me up to understand the need for Christ in my life and the need to be forgiven of my sins, the need to come back in a relationship with my Creator, and that distance, that chasm between us, that, where is this God type of feeling, that was a consequence of my own sin that needed to be atoned for, and it brought me back into that relationship with Christ. And that, in brief, that's my personal testimony. But as an artist, I had always, again, been searching for that purpose and meaning. And when I did become a Christian, I finally found the meaning and purpose, an eternal meaning, an eternal purpose in my art, in my, whatever you want to call it, my expression of through my art and my creativity, etc. And it rooted me in something eternal that is just truly for all my life has been a satisfying, deep richness of life that I'd sought for. Of course, life's not perfect. I'm still, messed up as a human being. I still have my problems that I struggle through, but now in being in connection with God, I finally have something worth saying. And in my mind, that's the most, the biggest thing lacking in art would be that lack of meaning and purpose. Now, of course, many artists seek to find it through things like humanism and, these kinds of various worldviews, but that fall apart. And that brings me to the second element of who I am, is that I've always loved apologetics and philosophy. And because I'm always curious about questions, doubts. I have my own doubts. I kind of laugh at atheists because, I know more problems with the Bible than they do, but I still have faith in it because I understand the answers to those issues and those problems that we have. So I'm always hungry to find answers and such. And so I'm driven by that. But I also, as a Christian, I would struggle to find out, well, how do I integrate my art and my faith? And it took many years, but I was inspired by Francis Schaeffer, who's long dead. He was in the 70s, and he helped me to begin to understand how to integrate my faith and my art. And it's not just a matter of, this is the thing that's important, and this is what we lost, as you were referring to, back in the Renaissance or the Reformation era even, that there was an understanding of how your art integrates with your life. And, he began that journey for me because a lot of Christian art, even at that time, was just poor. And I think that we still suffer from that even today. We've gotten a lot better. Christian movies are getting better, but I still watch them sometimes and I just go, man. And I think the issue is that Christian artists have not been able to find the proper biblical balance of craft and message. And they elevate message above all. Well, the message is most important, the gospel or whatever. So therefore, the production values suffer, or the craft suffers because they're actually deprioritizing something that should be equally as important. My personal sort of communication to the church, to Christian artists over these last couple decades, has been the search for finding a way to elevate your craft to be equally as important as the message. In other words, if you elevate the craft over the message, then you get these empty, vapid, sci-fi or action movies where there's no real much meaning or purpose to things, or what have you. But the reverse is, if you elevate message over everything, you get preachy, didactic. It's forced, and people just don't buy it. It doesn't ring true. And so that's been my pursuit as an artist, is to find that sweet spot of a truthful, honest portrayal in my art and my storytelling now as a means of honestly reckoning with and struggling with the meaning and purpose that we're all searching for. So, for example, if you're telling a story, or whether it's a novel or a movie, you always have a particular point of view. But that doesn't mean you can't be fair and balanced in the way that you're treating the opposing worldviews. So a story will have multiple characters, and they all have a different way of seeing life, and they're clashing. That's creating the drama, right? But those clashes are clashes of the way they see the world, which is in a way their worldview or their ethics. And in a way, your story is working out what are the consequences of ideas? What are the consequences of the way we think and live our lives? The nature of drama and story is to help bring that out in a human, dramatic, narrative way that is unlike, say, having a logical argument or a propositional discourse. They're both legitimate means of how we've been created, but I think that Christians have overly emphasized in some ways the intellectual side of their faith, or the doctrinal side of their faith, and have lost a sense of the human, the creative, the imagination side. Now, look, I'm not making a broad sweep, because I think in the last 10 years I've seen a great increase in appreciation in the Christian world for that better balance. And so I think things have been getting better for sure. But that's sort of how I have approached my aesthetic, which is my theory of beauty, how I approach truth and beauty, and how to integrate them and communicate truth, but also do so in a way that has integrity. So, if you're going to tell a story, and you're a Christian, you don't make the atheists all the bad people and the Christians are the good people. It's like, that's obviously a little simplistic, but sometimes I think that's where a lot of Christians suffer, in that they're not willing or able to enter into the worldview and the understanding of opposing ideas. What are the good elements of a person who's an atheist? Yeah, they may not believe in God, but they may have every human being is created in the image of God, and as such, despite the fact that they're running from God, there's still something positive about their view. Or if you're going to depict opposing views in your story, you show them at their best, not at their worst. When you show them at the worst, you get the demonizing, which we do have, sometimes in movies, even Hollywood movies, right, where they're demonizing conservatives and Christians. They're all leches, and they're all, secret murderers and secret gun fanatics who want to kill people. All those ridiculous stereotypes, they do that, and that's when their stories suffer, right? But as Christians, we have to be above that. We have to be able to honestly portray the best of these varying ways of seeing the world. And when you can do that, enter into that opposing perspective or narrative, whatever you want to call it, I think that you can tell a story, you can create art that has a sense of authenticity and truthfulness to it, even though it will have a point of view. So as a Christian, I moved forward. I began as a visual artist, but I've always loved movies since I was young. And basically, I started writing. I started pursuing screenwriting in the days where there was only a couple books about how to write screenplays. Now you got thousands of books and gurus all over the place, right? And there was only Sid Field in my day, so that's how dated I am. But nevertheless, I loved movies and I wanted to be a storyteller. And so I began that journey many years ago. And ultimately, I got my first movie made in about 2001, which was To End All Wars. And that was a prisoner of war story that stars Kiefer Sutherland. I think it's one of his best roles ever. It was a true story about prisoners of war suffering under the Japanese in World War II in Thailand, Burma, where they were building a railroad. And if you've ever seen the movie Bridge on the River Kwai, my story was the true story that they didn't tell you. The Bridge on the River Kwai was a great, exciting, Hollywood movie about escape. But my movie was that most men did not escape at all. And there was great suffering and such. But the story was so life-changing because it was a true story based on Ernest Gordon and his own journey of bringing a Bible into the camp and turning the whole camp from a hopeless, despairing, individualistic culture, so to speak, to a culture of hope and forgiveness even for their captors. And what does that mean and how does that work? So that story was very powerful, but it was a secular movie like Chariots of Fire with a Christian worldview undergirding it. But it just rang true with people. It won awards, and honestly, to this day, that was the best movie I've made in my life. I haven't made too many movies after that, but I continued to make them and continued to write them. And getting closer to this day, I've in Hollywood, you have down years. Even if you're a successful director, writer, whatever, producer, you'll have bad years where you may not get anything made. And I had a couple of bad years, and it forced me to reinvent myself and open up my avenues for storytelling, and that meant writing novels. And at the time, it was like 2010, at the time, I was writing, I came up with this great idea for a Hollywood movie, blockbuster, ancient world, from the Bible that both Hollywood would love because it would have wild creatures and weird things, and Christians would love because it's from the Bible. And it had weird things in it, like giants and watchers. I started studying this stuff and realized there's something in the Bible that's there, but because we read the Bible with our modern Western mindset, we don't see a lot of the ancient Near Eastern context and meaning of this. The literature of the Bible. And when I did that, this understanding just swept over me, and I saw the Bible in a fresh new way. And it wasn't anything different. It was just more of an expanded, interesting notion of what I call the war of the seed. What that means is you have this ancient biblical, probably the first expression of messianic prophecy in the Bible is in Genesis 3 when God curses the serpent and he says, your seed will be at enmity with the seed of the woman, meaning your offspring, And that notion, it goes throughout the whole Bible, but it opens up in very many interesting ways when you understand the connection of the Nephilim and the Watchers and all these weird things in the Bible that I would read over and go, what does that even mean? I don't know, And now it all makes much better sense with a theological purpose behind it. When that happened, I started writing that script on Noah, and it was really cool. I thought, surely they're going to love this. And then I found Darren Aronofsky was making a Noah movie. And I knew, of course, I'm a nobody in Hollywood. I'm like, okay, he's going to get his movie made. So I started realizing, well, how can I get my story out? Write it as a novel. This was when Kindle was just exploding. And I thought, might as well give it a try. Wrote it as a novel. Noah Primeval is the name of it. And that began my explosive journey as a novelist because it did really well. It inspired me to keep going. And I've now got like 16 books that are sort of in that series called Chronicles of the Nephilim. There's another series called Chronicles of the Watchers, and a third series called Chronicles of the Apocalypse. And all of them are integrated in various ways, but the same sort of supernatural understanding in the Bible about, we can go into the theology of it, but just sort of briefly sweeping over it, the purpose of these giants in the Bible and these angelic powers and principalities over nations, what is that all about? And it's just been an exciting road, and it sort of exploded even to now, where even 10, 12 years later, these novels of mine are like still number one in the top 10 best-selling still of like Bible fiction categories and religious sci-fi and fantasy and that kind of a stuff, because I talk about the spiritual world, and demons and angels and there's you have to have some creative license with that, right? But I try to stay true to the Bible, even though it's fantastical. I seek to stay true to the theology of the Bible, and I say that my novels are like, they're theological novels. They're not like, I think this is literally exactly what it may have looked like in the ancient world, because we don't really know. And so, but I'm trying to stay true to what I think the Bible is really teaching. And a lot of it's rooted around this notion of the messianic, the coming Messiah, which we now know as Jesus, right? But that was the thing that really exploded. And in the meantime, I'm still doing movies. But I've also opened up to other interesting, experiences. Like last year, I wrote a movie called My Son Hunter, which was about Hunter Biden's laptop. And of course, it was a movie nobody in Hollywood would distribute. And Robert Davi directed it, and we had some great actors in there. And it was a dark political satire, kind of like Wolf of Wall Street. And I was pretty proud of it, in terms of what we did with that. But that's online at mysonhunter.com, because you can't get that anywhere else. So, but I didn't write that out of a sort of like, I want to be political. I just found the whole, Hunter Biden, as we now see, everything that's come out now, actually we knew back then, but the media suppressed it. And so all the stuff you're seeing now, a lot of it is in the movie. It's still there, and it's still legitimate. But it's not like, I want to do political movies, because I don't. I'm not interested in that. I just found this relationship of Hunter Biden and his father and his dead brother, Beau Biden, was this triangle of dysfunction that's very universal, very, like mafia families, you know what I mean? It's that kind of dysfunction on that level. And I just found Hunter Biden to be a tragic character, like almost Shakespearean in his tragedy, right? And so much so that even the left, who completely hated and attacked the movie, they some of them admitted, like, you know what, they portray Hunter somewhat empathetically. In other words, they were surprised that I didn't demonize Hunter Biden, because that's not good writing in my mind. I want to understand him. I want to have empathy for his character, even though he ultimately, is a tragic figure. So I'm still doing some movies like that. But my novel series was along the lines of, Bible novels, retelling Bible stories. And I had never wanted to do that. Like, why should I? We've got the Bible, right? But what I realized was that everyone, you can interpret the Bible. People can just read it flatly, and they don't even realize that they're interpreting. They just think they're reading it, but you're interpreting everything. And as we know, there's many denominations, right? There's many theologies. Some are good, some are bad. But the point is that there is a theological perspective on the Bible that can be enriching and open it up to you. And so retelling Bible stories is a way of mining that theology that you may not see if you just read the Bible straight without some help. Just like a pastor might give a sermon and expound on the theology of a Bible text, right? And in the same way, that's what novels can help us do but they do it rather than a sermon where it's, preaching, and which is helpful, but a story can help you communicate narratively in a way that can really reach people, and it really has. So I mean, I've oh my gosh, I've sold over $3.5 million in retail of my books, and over 360,000 books sold. So it's been going really well. But to bring it up to date, the latest, kind of the reason why I'm on this show, I guess, from my perspective, is I got to tout my latest book. And that, of course, is Cruel Logic. So after all these years doing all these Bible novels, I had this idea that I actually had written as a script, as a movie script years ago, called Cruel Logic. And the premise of it is completely different than my other material. It's a thriller. It's like Silence of the Lambs. Okay, it's one of those serial killer thrillers. And where it came from was, and this was just released in September, and it's been doing well. I've been getting some very good responses from people. It's a very different, very unique approach to this. I call it an intelligent thriller or a theological thriller, because the premise of the story is there's this brilliant serial killer who is also a philosophy professor. And what he does is he captures university professors and he records a debate with them. He has a debate. And the debate is the topic of the debate is his moral right to kill them. So he'll capture like an evolutionary biologist or a queer theorist, and he'll tie them up to a chair and just say, hey, look, I'm going to kill you, but give me, if what you say is true about reality, give me one valid, logically valid reason why I should not kill you, and I will let you go. And this, of course, forces all these various worldviews, again, whether it's evolution or, social justice or whatever, all these things going on. It gives them the opportunity to try to defend their ethic, their belief in ethics and moral right and wrong. And there are a lot of twists, and the purpose of the serial killer is not readily apparent, but on the surface you can see he's sort of proving a moral point, isn't he? And needless to say, the professors do not do well because, I believe that, in terms of human philosophy and human worldviews, without God, and we know the university is godless, right? And so without God, you ultimately have no actual foundation for moral meaning or at all. There's no real meaning. There's only power. And so that's sort of I readily acknowledge I kind of it originated in my love of apologetics, and I'm like, I make these arguments for the moral existence of God all the time, but a lot of people don't like abstract intellectual arguments. And I could write a book about it, but there's 1,000 apologetics books. But I've always loved incarnating my ideas into a story because that makes it more interesting, and sometimes people can absorb it better that way. And that's where I come up with the idea of this actually from another Christian apologist from decades ago, where he sort of came up with the metaphor himself about talking to an atheist and saying, okay, if what you believe is true about reality, say it's 1940s Germany and I'm a Nazi with a gun at you and pointed at you and you're a Jew. Give me one valid reason why I shouldn't kill you. I heard that years ago and I just never forgot it. And so when I wrote this script called Cruel Logic years ago, and it won awards and stuff, but I wasn't able to get it made as a movie. And so I finally got some opening to finally write this thing as a novel. And what's interesting is when I first wrote it, there wasn't much at all about the wokeness in universities that we now know. So since that time, this has exploded, and I realized there's a whole new dimension to the story that I've incorporated, which is the wokeness of modern higher education, basically, and how there's an unbroken line from ideas to consequences. Ideas have consequences, and if you teach students that they're nothing but animals, there is no God, there's no transcendent objective right and wrong, it's no surprise that they will act like animals without moral right and wrong, right? If you teach them that, our subjective personal identity is defined by our own imagination, right? Men can become a woman, women can be men, or what have you. When you teach them that, it's no surprise they will behave that way. And but also, if you teach them that all of reality or all of our society is reducible to oppressed classes and oppressor classes, and you must overthrow the oppressor, and the oppressor are white male heterosexual Christians, and the oppressed are everyone else, people of color, women, anyone who's a minority, gays, and all this. And you teach them that that's the ultimate division of reality, and you're a member of a class, you have no individuality, you just are a member of a class or a group. Then it's no surprise they will behave with racist, hateful, violent reactions towards people because of the groups they're in. Just because you're white, just because you're a Christian, you're evil to them. And what do we see now across America? We see students who are taking what they've been taught in the universities, they go out in the world, get their jobs, and they bring it into DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, into the corporations and everywhere, the government, and now they've captured all these major institutions, and what do we see? We see persecution on an unprecedented level. We see, people losing their jobs, their livelihoods being canceled. Free speech is going down the tubes, and they're oppressing, on every level. In the name of freedom from oppression, they're actually oppressing people. And so we see, and these violent riots that are rising up in America in the name of, social justice, right? They're actually injustice in the name of social justice. So these are all these big picture factors that I see, that I have seen originate in the higher education, in the university, and they trickle down into the culture, and that's what's happened. So there's a big connection in my story between, really, in a sense, the serial killer as the apex predator, and these ideas of rejecting Western civilization, right, that we hear of all the time. Western civilization is rooted in Judeo-Christianity, so it's the rejection of the Christian God, rejection of Western civilization, and they are building for this violent confrontation with the colonizers, as they call it. And this is what my story ultimately shows, this rise in aggression towards ultimate violence. So it's sort of like a serial killer story that's taking place in an environment of great hostility, and how they're all interconnected. That's the big picture of what's going on with the story. But I also, I wrote it as an entertaining thriller novel, and I hope that people enjoy it as much as they did Silence of the Lambs. And it's just that when you see this killer and you see how he's thinking and how he's arguing, you learn a little bit about ethics, and you're challenged to think through your own beliefs. And, the question that I have all the time is, one of my headlines is, could you defend your beliefs if your life depended on it? And that's something we all should be thinking through, So this is where I end up today, and I'm grateful to be on your show to be able to talk about this. But we can go down any pathway.
You did it quite well, and probably the longest answer to a question of a guest I've had. But I just let you go because I kind of set you up and said, you tell me who you are, and so you just kind of ran with it as a storyteller would. And so that's why I let you go, because it was interesting and it was important, but I wanted people to see just kind of your personality, your walk, your journey, just to get to know a human being who has a very specific purpose and point of view. And then how, more importantly, maybe, or at least equally important, that you gave it a practical legs to walk on. You gave it some volition and some teleology so that it could create value, that you could do something with this thing instead of just thinking about it or speculating, which is exactly what the Frankfurt School, which created our cultural Marxism, which created our critical theory, which created our critical race theory, which created our intersectionality, which is also based on postmodernism and given permission through atheism to be your own gods, and thus, because, as Nietzsche would say, there is no purpose and value and that all things are permissible, then there are no rules, and we were getting exactly the results of that in real time. But it's dangerous and it's deadly and it's evil and it's cancerous, because everything that the enemy creates is that thing. It's always a counterfeit of God's beautiful creation, but it's also a degradation and a deconstruction. It always amuses me when I hear of this sort of new deconstruction movement in Christianity, as though they're getting to some deeper understanding of a 2,000-year-old belief system that has withstood this, not only the test of time, but created the greatest civilization in human history. And I'm going, you're a deconstructionist and you're proud of that? A child can deconstruct. It's not hard to break things. It's hard to build.
Yeah.
It's not hard.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not hard to burn down a building. It's hard to become an architect and to create one. It's not hard to do modern art because it has no perimeters. So it has no value because you don't even believe it has value. The absurdity of it, you believe, is enough to monetize it. It's how superficial it is. It's how myopic. The loss of the transcendence, the loss of art driving us to something greater than ourselves so we can be inspired is literally such a tragedy, because art had so much to give us as humans. It was part of what makes us human. Animals don't do this. Stars don't do this. The universe doesn't create art. It is a brainless natural phenomenon that only humans can observe and draw conclusions from. We are God's image incarnate, but we're flawed and we're sin-filled. And so God had to fix it by dimensionalizing himself, experiencing what he created, and then suffering for it. And so it's the greatest and most baffling story there has ever been. It's absurd that God became that which he created and allowed himself to die. It's the ultimate, as C.S. Lewis would say, the true myth. It's so crazy that it's either the most amazing, breathtaking story of all time, or it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Because it comes across that way. Well, when you were talking about everything about it, and I'm grateful that you kind of went into depth, because there were so many things to examine in that as an artist that I want to get some of your thoughts on. So the first thing I'm curious about, and it's more about some of the details of the Nephilim, the giants, and so forth. So was this pre Michael Heiser and Unseen Realm?
Actually, it is concurrent with Michael Heiser. In other words, when I was doing the research, I stumbled upon Mike Heiser, but this was before Mike became famous. In fact,
but did the Unseen Realm was it in print?
No, but here's what it was. It was called. He was working on it, and it was called The Myth That Is True. That C.S. Lewis line, right? And because he wasn't famous and he didn't even know that people would even care, he was posting it online as he was writing it. So me and several other of us guys who have gotten into it, we stumbled on it around the same time period, and just it blew our minds. And I was able to contact him. I became his friend, and I'm on the board of his ministry. So he did influence me absolutely before the book Unseen Realm, but technically it was the material that ultimately became the Unseen Realm. So yeah, I highly recommend that book to everybody. He's a strong evangelical, conservative believer in, he passed away just last year, sadly, of cancer. But I recommend him because he's solid and he's not a liberal who is undermining the Bible, but he's dealing with these really wild things.
I kind of stumbled upon him too, just listening to podcasts and different apologetics. I too have been absolutely intrigued and enthralled by apologetics, philosophy, logic, reason, theology, worldviews, and that's been part of my comedy for years. Is my Christian worldview is my social commentary. So I'm basically Dave Chappelle or Richard Pryor or Carlin, from a Christian perspective. So it has that DNA, I guess, to it. So, anyways, when I came across Heiser, boy, tread lightly, because it's a little unnerving. Because honestly, Brian, you're almost like, man, this sounds like Mormonism. It sounds like, this kind of sounds like cult stuff. And then you go, but if you're telling me this is what my Bible says, now we got to get the context. We have to make sure we're using the proper words. We got to make sure it's interpreted properly, because obviously you go from language to language, you can lose something. You got to understand, and he emphasizes this, the time frame and period this happened, the culture that it happened, so you can really understand what they're getting at. The reason they said chariots is because there weren't cars. They don't know what else to say. This is all we know. But obviously a chariot is not a good representation of a spaceship. We have to understand that they were doing the best they can with describing under the perimeters of the culture and the time they lived, to tell something to somebody that 2,000 years later, it would still have revelation power. So that's a tricky thing to do unless God's involved. But once you kind of understand that there's a deeper place than even you had ever realized, growing up in the church like I did and being a Christian basically my whole life, you kind of think you heard it all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And suddenly he's going, did you know that this really is part of this world that you believe in? And it's going to kind of sound magic, but
Yeah.
it's real. It's hard
Yeah.
to navigate.
Well, one of the things I liked, one of the things he used to say was, if it's in the Bible, if it's weird, it's important, because you stumble on these passages and it's just like, wow, that's just weird. That doesn't fit. Sometimes it kind of seems, like mythological or whatever, right? And I remember, for me, one of those, and there were many of those passages. There's a lot of one, but as a believer, I just go, well, I don't understand it. Maybe I will someday, and I keep reading, right? But the most, bizarre passage to me had always been Genesis 6:1-4, where it talks about the sons of God in heaven saw that the daughters of men were beautiful, took them as their wives, took them as their own, and they bore them. They gave them progeny, and they bore them Nephilim, which is a word for giants, and these were mighty warriors. And you're just like going, that sounds a lot like Titans and all this kind of stuff, and weird mythology. Ironically, it turns out that according to Middle Eastern scholarship, the Greeks got their ideas actually from the ancient Middle East, the Greek notion of the Titans and the giants and stuff. So actually, the Middle East is prior to the Greeks. But nevertheless, it would just be weird. And so he started tying the thread of all these weird passages. And a lot of times they're like occultic, or passages in the Bible, like where it references these gods and stuff, and you're like, oh, what is that? And like you said, in fact at first, because I knew a little bit about Mormonism, like, this sounds a lot like Mormonism. But it turns out, like, Michael has written articles against Mormonism, and he explains how no, this is where you're different from what I'm saying, and they're really great stuff and great material. But here's the big problem: is what happens is we react because we've been conditioned by a certain Western modern way of thinking, and I'll just say the word evangelicalism is a broad term, but it's it's sort of the basic, one of the most basic paradigms that we're operating on. There's different varieties of, I get that, but in that paradigm, it's this notion that we approach the Bible as from an absolute monotheistic perspective, and we don't realize that monotheism term was created in the Middle Ages to differentiate themselves, but biblically, that term isn't in there. And biblically, because we have this bias that there can be no other gods, and only God alone exists and no other gods, then when we read the Bible and we see words like there are references to gods other than Yahweh, we redefine it, we twist it, we change it around, or the translations hide it, like by saying things like calling them angels or something like that. And so the first step of overcoming your bias is when you can face the scriptures and it literally says there are other gods, and that causes this that's polytheism, but these are assumptions that we have. So you first have to say, well, if the Bible says it, then I believe it, and I have to adjust my thinking. I don't adjust the Bible to my thinking. I adjust my thinking to the Bible. So then you say, well, okay, there does seem to be passages that indicate, Yahweh is the God over all gods, and he alone is the creator, and there's no one like him, and there's no one infinite, and all this. And so what does this mean then when it's using the word gods? And you have to study it deeper to understand the context. And when you do, you start to realize that the word gods in the Hebrew is not the way the word God means to us in the modern West. When we hear the word God, we automatically think of, well, that's got to have infiniteness, creator, absolutely transcendent. We think of our notion of God, and so therefore there can be no gods like that God. But the Bible uses the terms in two different ways, and one, it does refer to Yahweh as God, but it also refers to other beings as gods. And Heiser really brought about the help in understanding that there are spirit beings that are called gods. There are angels that are called gods. These are like watchers in the Bible, right? And so when Samuel was called up by the Ob, or the witch of Endor, he was called an Elohim, or a god. So the word for God is Elohim, and it's used in it means different things, but the basic context is, if you are an Elohim, you exist primarily in the spiritual dimension. And so beings that exist in the spiritual dimension are Elohim. That's why Yahweh is Elohim, because he is too, but he's the Elohim of Elohims. Oh, I get it.
Well, and that would
So you
make
start
more
to see.
that would make more sense, in that we have always believed in demons and angels as Christians for the most part, without kind of really stopping and going, well, wait a minute. Have you ever thought about what that really means? That's another created being like us, but different than us, something else that interacts with us, transcendent to the degree that we don't see them in a dimensionalized form unless they choose to become that. So there's this other, I mean, come on, man. It's either myth and just crap that we make up because we're trying to survive until we go into eternal unconsciousness, or this is how the world works. There's a spiritual dimension that is just so much more nuanced and robust and just active that we're not seeing it. And we don't, and when you begin to see and accept it and believe, it's almost like God says, I will give you as much as you choose. So when you're ready to move in here, you're going to start seeing crazy crap that you've not seen before. If you don't, you'll get the myopic view. But if you want to you want to see what I'm all about, buckle up, because there's some stuff out there you just aren't going to. It's probably why he is unviewable. There's a sense that to see God is to die. Like it's something that, now we don't know what that looks like, but there has to be some kind of awesome. That's why I've always hated when all the kids were, saying awesome.
It degraded the word.
Saved. It should be saved for awe-inspiring. It should be saved for the moment when you can barely breathe and say, awesome. I am in a place that I am frightened of, because to be in God's presence, you don't sit there in this sense of, wow, God's here. I think it brings you to your knees going, may I look? I don't know what to do. I'm scared. Even being in the presence of angels, usually people were in fear. What are you? It's probably why what we want to see in a dimensionalized version oftentimes is withheld from us, because God's saying it's going to scare you. You don't understand this world, but there's a lot here that is you're just not really capable of handling yet. You're going to have to take some spiritual dives and prepare yourself for the world that if you really want to go here, there's a lot more than you're ready to oftentimes accept, and then you get in over your head. Well, I wonder, I don't want to, I mean, that's a great, incredibly important world. I brought up Heiser just because I was curious if you preceded him in this curiosity about Elohim and Nephilim, because it's becoming such a big deal lately in culture.
And look, I like to say something about that too, because sadly, as with all things, you get movements and you get the extremes. And sadly, there's, I call them Nephilim nuts. There's far too many people out there that just, they glom onto this and it becomes their new religion, where like everything's about giants and Nephilim, and then they connect it all up with this, the Bible prophecy and the one world order and all this kind of stuff, and it's just sort of it becomes a substitute for the faith rather than a supplement or an enrichment of the faith,
or an enhancement.
An enhancement, and I'm more in Michael's camp. When we were alive, I was more like him, and he was more measured in how he approaches this. And there were people out there, they're giants 30 feet tall and 40 feet tall. It's like, this is ridiculous. No, there isn't. There's no biblical warrant for that. But that's the kind of extremes that the nuts go to, and it sheds bad light, unfortunately, on the movement, or whatever you want to call it. The
I think
awareness.
so. I think that. I think that even for sincere believers who really do want to go deep, um, I think the enemy kind of looks at them and says, "Well, I can't steal their soul; that's gone. I can't bring them to hell. I can't take away from them even their belief in Christ or their commitment to this truth of the Judeo-Christian reality. So the only thing maybe left for me is what if I throw in some additional elements of this that will make them sound crazy? Like I can't get them to walk away, so I'll add some elements that they will see as a deeper understanding, and instead will make people discount them even on the revelation they have because they add this crazy stuff. Well, also we never, the Earth's flat, and don't forget that.
Yeah.
And they're like,
Yeah.
what? Now
Yeah.
so you've shot yourself in the foot because the revelation you could have shared gets spun into other elements that make people think we're just stupid. And so I don't know, exactly how to manage it because I know people that are in that world who are true God-fearing believers, and they really are trying sincerely to go as deep as they can go, and sometimes it's just, I guess, a challenge to always be able, if you can, to be objective enough to make sure, am I getting a little off track here? And how do you know sometimes? Sincerely believing something is a difficult it's difficult to get somebody out of that cognitive dissonance because they're really trying honestly to find God at the deepest levels, and so they
Sure.
feel like you're almost knocking their insight instead of saying, "No, brother, I'm just saying, just because you're seeking God doesn't mean you're always going to get it right. Sometimes you still have to make sure that I'm not getting thrown off track, even in your sincerity." Um, I do want to quickly, though, since we're kind of running out of time, I don't mind going a little bit longer if you don't, but
Sure.
I don't want to also keep you if you have things going. But
No
I
problem.
don't want to. In the Nephilim thing, I wasn't expecting to go to, but I'm glad that we did because it's an important topic that's happening right now. I like that that you've added it in your books, and I do want to put a clip of where people can get your books and they can see what you're up to because I'm sure by now they're intrigued and want to, and they should. And I love the cruel logic idea. I saw Steve Dace's novel Nefarious turn into a movie recently, and I was really excited
Yeah,
about that
that was
because
great.
so. I'm
was
like
good.
going, bravo, brother. Now we're getting somewhere with this faith-based films, and I kind of want to talk about that for a minute, Brian. The faith-based industry. I've probably done 20 films in my lifetime, mainly faith-based. As an actor, I love the work. I love storytelling. I love character development and that exploration as an actor. Um, and so having grown up in that industry in the last 20 something years or more, I've always talked to directors and producers who are usually believers. We always have the same dilemma. How do we do things sophisticated? How do we do the stories we really want to tell to people that really don't want it? The people that go to watch faith-based films that are adherents to faith-based films that will watch nothing but faith-based films also create this false boundary line by which they believe faith-based film has to maintain its existence, that they create the perimeters. And it's like, well, you're the audience, you're the ticket buyer, I get it. Pragmatically, if you don't show up, we ain't going to make these. But honestly, viewer of art, God bless you, you're not the rulers of this thing. You're not the rule. It has to be the artists because we're the ones that are given this purpose to create so you can be inspired by it. But if you are concerned or overly, what I've always said over the years, especially as a comic who's unique in the Christian realm, clearly in the style that I use, I'm still kind of one of a kind in the Christian comedy realm. Is I said Christians in America, for the most part, have been trained to judge content instead of context. And that's all the difference in the world. Because if you're not able, my best story is The Blind Side was made certainly not by believers. It had a Oscar win for what's her name?
Sandra Bullock.
Yes, she won, and it was a great story. It's a Christian story of a Christian family doing Christian things, and it's true. And so Lifeway, the brick and mortar Lifeway, had it in their shelves, and there was either like a beer or a gun or something in somewhere in because
Or cleavage. That's another thing.
It was-
Cleavage.
okay, but I think in this case it was literally a guy who was drinking a beer because they were in the hood, right? And he was with a gang member, so the guy's drinking a beer or have a gun, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if a pastor complained, and they pulled it. I said, you pulled The Blind Side because a guy was angry that when they went into the hood and talked to a gang member, he had a gun. That's how.
Well, we had the same problem with my movie, Two Untold Wars. These men are suffering. There's a lot of F words in there. And look, I'm sorry, it's not for people of faint of heart, so that's fine. It's not for children, that's fine. But we couldn't get it distributed, or in whatever the Christian bookstores and all that for that reason as well. And yet, it's one of the most powerful Christian Chariots of Fire type stories that have been made.
Well, and here's the deal. What they would say is, listen, we're Christians. We're trying to have a pure life, right? A righteous life. So we just don't want any images that could taint our perspective. And our kids might be watching it. Okay, let's start with one. Kids don't belong everywhere.
Yeah.
They don't belong in every event that Christians are talking at. They don't belong in a marriage retreat where sex, obviously, they don't belong there. So maybe the problem is you think that your 5-year-old should come to every event that exists on there. Well, if that's the only events your church is creating, find a different church. Because if they're creating things for adults that 5-year-olds can dig, something's wrong. How are you going to communicate deeper places or hard places or life experience places that are painful and evil and dark that you've had to overcome? That isn't time for a child to pick that up. They're not ready for that. It's not for them. But you're going to dumb that down because a kid might be that the kid doesn't belong there. So that's my first right. And I know that personally as a comic, they think I'm a clown or something, that let's bring the kids. It's comedy family night. It's like, if stand-up comedy that I've created, I don't want it to insult people, and I don't want kids to be in some ways damaged in my presence if they were there. And kids go to my show and they actually kind of like it, believe it or not, because I make faces and I'm animated. But I didn't write it for kids.
Yeah.
I wrote it for adults. I want you guys to learn from this and grow from it, and then you pass that on to your kids. So phase one, it's not, everything isn't for kids. Phase two, well, we just feel like the beer might make our kid think about drinking a beer. Well, it might make my kid. Well, if you imply the sexual thing, then my kid might start lusting, and so you're concerned that if the image is shown not glorified, but showing sin as it is, so that when it is redeemed, there's some gravitas to it. But you want to get rid of that. Do me a favor then, brother. Let's not make a movie where two daughters have sex with their dad and get pregnant, and it's a great faith-based film. I got one. A voyeur peers in as a woman's showering, has sex with her, and kills her husband. That's a faith-based film. Can't have that. Yeah. Are you crazy? Why even bring that up in my presence? They're all Bible stories.
Yeah, exactly.
They're all Lot.
Rated R.
They're Lot, and they're Abraham, and they're Noah, and they're David, and they are prostitutes letting the guy down the walls, and they are gritty. When I say what kind of a person should be involved in this experience, he who pisseth upon a wall, a guy with a penis, because they're the ones that can piss on a wall. That's in the Bible. That's the gritty, earthy. Thank you, God. You speak to us like humans that we are, so we can relate to you, because you're too much of you for us to grasp. So you dumb it down, not to make it less valuable or not to make it less deep, but to make it accessible.
Now, look, there's a balance here, because I do believe that as an artist, you are beholden to your audience. And I do believe sometimes the audience demands are too much. Sometimes it's genre. It's just every Christian movies are a genre, just like horror movies or whatever. And there are things that people want to see, and you got to work within parameters, and you got to work with your audience. You got to respect them, right? But what you're getting to, though, is some of the Christian boundaries and standards are unbiblical, actually, because they don't even match the Bible. And I agree with you. In fact, I wrote a book called Hollywood Worldviews, and I have a whole chapter on sex and violence in the Bible. And I bring out a lot, including the Song of Solomon, which the Hebrew is actually quite explicit, more so than the translators. The English translators were embarrassed and toned it down. So this is not to justify porn. It's not to justify excess violence. It's just to recognize what you're getting at, which is that Christians need to recognize that the Bible they're reading is full of all this stuff, is full of this evil, and some of it's more explicit than others. But what's the point? What's the context? And what I did with Hollywood Worldviews was I tried to as a storyteller, I'm a professional and I've studied storytelling. And so I was explaining to the audience, here's the structure of storytelling, why we do what we do and how we communicate our worldview. Because if you have a better understanding, you'll be able to appreciate the movies you're watching, the TV you're watching. You won't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Oh, there's too much sex and violence. Now, look, there are lines you have to draw, for sure. These are all things we got to work on. And I think there are creative ways of communicating these sins, like the Bible does. The Bible doesn't always show it explicitly. It implies it or it refers to it. There are ways that we can deal with it, not as explicitly, but we have to deal with these sins, because if you ignore them, my big argument is, or if you whitewash them and you make your villains something out of the 1970s television show, it won't ring true. If the evil doesn't ring true, then the redemption that you're trying to propose through the story, and stories are all about redemption, if you don't portray the evil accurately, then your redemption has no power and will not be believed.
Yeah.
And
that's exactly what I'm getting at.
And
That's kind of what I'm saying. Now, you're right in that there are some stories that is for family. And so I'm not saying that there's not a place for G-rated, if we want to go old school. Obviously, there's a place for cartoons. There's a place for sweet versions of Bible stories for kids. Obviously, I'm not acting as though we shouldn't have different genres or different options for different ages. We need them all. I think what I'm proposing, Brian, is, but for the most part, if you want to get grittier, if you want to get dangerous, not for the sake of irreverence, but for the sake of a deeper story that you can't not feel, you got to be able to kind of not have chains placed upon you in that storytelling. And that is a big difference.
That's why I didn't like to do Christian movies. In fact,
Yeah,
my
because
goal
they
had
don't
never
even
been to do.
I think my summary is, it's not that there shouldn't be stuff for the whole family, Brian. It's that they don't oftentimes allow us anything else. That's my problem. Is you're telling me it is only faith-based, it's only Christian if it look. It's like, no, that's absurd. Obviously, the Bible, some of the stories you tell your kid, and you don't. The proof is, when's the last time you got your 5-year-olds down before they go to bed at night? You want to read in the Bible, you read them Song of Solomon.
Yeah.
When have you done that?
Or Ezekiel chapter 16.
Yeah. When have you ever done that? Why do you
With
not
gang
tell
rape
those?
and everything. Yeah.
So, well, I'll tell you what I'll tell you what I want to do.
Okay.
I want to kind of start wrapping it up, not because it's not a great conversation. It is. Perhaps we can do it again and go deeper, because You really found some spaces that I wasn't sure where we'd go, and I love them, and I'm grateful for them because I love this art aspect of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick bonus question. This is something I just do for my subscribers. So all it is it's something that those who've subscribed get to hear this, and it's not going to be on this regular interview. So, so you just do it like you're still doing it, but it just won't be in the original text, and then I'll wrap it up. But I do want to ask you this one question. I think it would be you'd be a great a person to articulate this, perfect person. So we talk about the storytelling and the movies and the different ways that they are different ways to tell a story. So what I'd like you to do, if you could quickly, is can you give me a comparison between what you would consider a faith-based film that is lacking in depth, is hamstrung based on false or contrived parameters that break the story down from what it could have been, and then give me a movie that you say, but let me show you one that was done well. Let me tell you why they really gave us a sophisticated storyline. Can you compare two of those? Is that possible? Hey guys, I'm interrupting my own interview with Brian Godawa to tell you, if you want the answer that you haven't heard yet, go to bradstine.com and join one of the 3 tiers. It is the militia of the mind, it is the warrior level, or it is the special forces. And then you'll get all kinds of special content and bonus answers to make you smarter than you could ever imagine. Go there now, jump on and join the Mighty 10,000.
Thanks for having
making this material out there and putting it out there. I'm grateful that my people get to kind of get to know you and see what you're up to, and just to get a deeper understanding of who is doing some really interesting things in the Christian realm that oftentimes we just don't understand. Or maybe they do. Maybe many of these people have read your books and now they get to put a face to the name, so that's cool too. But folks, listen, here's the truth. It really is this simple. If you're watching me from Ireland or Scotland or Des Moines, which is what I get oddly, or Australia or whatever, here's what it really boils down to, folks. I'm sorry, but this is the truth. Jesus Christ is God. He's the only one that ever proved it. He's the only one that ever did anything that is historically accurate, proven to. I know you don't have to agree, or you think they embellish. You can say everything you want. There's never been a candidate in human history that is historically provable that did things that would prove he was exactly who he said he was, and prophetically was expected to show up to even show that linear time has been circumvented. This is what it means to be a Christian. It is deeper, it is harder, it is more disciplined, and it is more rigid than people have wanted it to be. Well, those people are being weeded out. God has had enough of the posers. He said, either get in or get out. He even said in his word, I'd rather you go to hell than abuse the grace of my son by being lukewarm. Get in or get out. That's what God says. So the good news is, if you're listening to this, you're still on this earth, and you can still come to Christ and say, I don't get it all, I don't understand it all, but I need to know what is true. And Christians, we're the last truth tellers on earth. We are in an age of absolute lunacy, where reality has been turned on its head. There is no up, there's no down, there's no truth. And it's gone beyond that into absurdity. And that's where we are. So this is the time for the truth tellers, the true Christ followers, to unapologetically say, I'm not perfect. Matter of fact, the Bible proves Christianity, because it even says all of my followers will be flawed and broken, and I love him anyways. And that's the greatest news you can have. He takes you as a repentant sinner, just the way you are. So folks, this is God's comic, Brad Stine. This is Brad Stine Has Issues. This is Brian Godawa. Become a fan, buy all of his books. Remember, if they ever say you are being politically incorrect, always thank them for the compliment. And remember, all I'm doing is putting the woke back to sleep. See you next Monday.